Electric vehicles are exciting, and there's a lot more of them now. There's going to be a lot more of them in the future. So one gets labeled as being anti-EV by pointing out the problems, not with electric vehicles, but with mandates that you could only buy and run an electric vehicle, which is what 12 states are planning to do, and which is what will happen if the EPA gets its way. Maybe it should be self-evident, a really bad idea. It's a really bad idea not because EVs aren't fun to drive, it's because they're expensive. And they're going to stay expensive for a long time compared to the average car. They're inconvenient for most drivers, not all. And they increase our dependence on imports, and China specifically. These are all not good things to force on the economy. Cars are amazing machines, first. I think there's an underappreciation in the chattering classes, if you like, of how amazing cars are. And I don't think it's underappreciated globally for people who don't have cars, or for whether you're a millennial, a Gen Z, or a Gen X. People appreciate cars because they want one. In fact, the idea that we're becoming a post-car culture isn't true. We don't see it in the data. You don't see it in surveys. In fact, you don't even see it in global surveys. What you find, in fact, is that the rising generation, the Gen Zs, want to buy cars. And they really do want to buy cars. They overwhelmingly want to buy cars. The reason that they don't buy cars immediately is they can't afford them. So EVs are expensive because of how they're made. And so on average, an EV is going to be a car for a wealthier family, and garage makes it easy to charge it overnight because that's how long it takes to refuel them inexpensively. The essence of the problem is there's a myth about EVs being simpler. That's the essence of the problem. They aren't simpler. They're differently complicated. So, a regular car has a complicated internal combustion engine with hundreds of moving parts and a simple fuel tank with one moving part, the fuel pump. An EV flips that complexity. It has a simple drive system, an electric motor, typically one or two, with one or two moving parts. But its fuel tank, the battery, is enormous. For a typical EV, it weighs 1,000 pounds, has hundreds, if not thousands of parts. The parts actually move. They just move microscopically. It's chemicals. It has a cooling system, safety systems, power electronics, structural systems. It's a very complicated engine, but it's an electrochemical engine instead of a thermodynamic engine, if you like. So you just swap complexities. And where do you get the materials to make the battery? Because the battery has to be assembled and made from all kinds of materials, not just lithium for a lithium battery, self-evidently. That's the smallest mineral component in the battery. The biggest components are things like graphite and aluminum and nickel and copper and a lot of chemicals. So, you have to assemble all these things. It's a very complicated machine. As I said, thousands of parts, thousands of welds. It turns out it's very expensive. The whole idea of forcing EVs on people and subsidizing them. So the Inflation Reduction Act has massive subsidies, bigger than most people realize. Roughly speaking, they will subsidize EVs to the tune of about $30,000 per car. And even with those subsidies, they're losing $50,000 a car. You can do the math, as they say. This is not a smart thing for automakers to do. But the whole purpose of this is anchored in sort of the two sort of canons of the EV orthodoxy, right? They have two central canons. One is if we make people use lots of EVs, we'll cut a lot of oil use, because burning oil emits carbon dioxide. But the goal is to cut oil use. That's the canon one. And they don't burn oil, right? Obviously. So I guess if you have lots of EVs, self-evidently, you'll cut oil use. The second canon is that the EVs will be easier to make, they're cheaper, and they have low environmental impacts. So first of all, there's arithmetic on this. We know how many cars are in the world. We know how much oil is used for cars and other things. Even if half of the world's cars were EVs, and we're not going to come close to that anytime in the foreseeable future, it would reduce global oil use by just 10%. The idea that this is somehow a clean and environmentally benign technology is just, you could be polite and call it myopia. Again, back to the battery. It weighs about 1,000 pounds. To make the battery, you have to get the copper and the nickel and the aluminum and the manganese and the graphite and cobalt. You have to mine that stuff somewhere and refine it. But this is how it works out in those kinds of metals and minerals. To make a 1,000-pound battery, somewhere on Earth, 500,000 pounds of rock have been dug up for one battery, for one car. All that digging up, that 500,000 pounds of rock, is dug up with big machines that burn oil. It's transported by big machines that burn oil. The rock has to be crushed with big machines in most of the world that burn coal to run the electricity for the machines, and in some parts of the world that burn natural gas. And then you have to use hydrocarbons, oil and gas, to make the chemicals that dissolve the rock to get the chemicals out. This whole supply chain involves using hydrocarbons hidden from your car. So in effect, there is a tailpipe for EVs. It's just elsewhere. They emit carbon dioxide elsewhere. They cause pollution elsewhere in other countries. And apparently environmentalists who used to say it's one Earth, we worry about the planet, only care about the planet in their garage. They don't care about the planet in Africa where the environmental challenges occur and where we push all the social challenges into fragile economies. Fundamentally, it's a bad trade for the United States economically. It's actually a bad trade for the environment. And you could say in many ways it's an immoral trade. A lot of what most people have done, they did in the election, which is a shift in political philosophy. I mean, simplistically speaking, the Democratic Party had moved to we know better, we're in charge, we're statists, and we want you all to drive EVs. The Republican Party, simplistically put, mostly, I hope, a majority, are against heavy-handed subsidies. You don't find Republicans saying they want to pollute the air. No one thinks that way anymore. But they're against heavy-handed subsidies, mandates, and pushing industries, and forcing consumers to make choices that they don't want to make. So if you're a citizen, your real opportunity on these things is frankly anchored in the electoral process. You get to choose a team that has a different approach. If you want to know how to pick the team from the viewpoint of cars and those, it's remarkably easy to prove all the things that I've said and written. You don't have to be an engineer or a scientist. You don't have to. I'm a physicist. I find it fascinating. Not everybody finds these things fascinating, but it's not hard to figure it out. You can go to Google. Google actually doesn't lie if you type in, where does copper come from? How much copper is in a car? How much rock do you have to dig up to get copper for that car? So it's remarkably easy to get the facts, but you have to do a little work. The consequence of that is maybe the other thing citizens can do, and they're doing it anyway, is they're not buying the cars. I mean, people buy Teslas, and again, it's a terrific car. The ability to build a car that works, it works well, is safe, it's fun to drive, it sells into the discerning luxury car market, one heck of an achievement, impressive, terrific car. But people are free to buy it, and they have bought it, and they will continue to buy it. And the other automakers are desperate to compete with them because he's stealing their market in the luxury car category. But this is like saying sports cars are going to replace every kind of automobile in the world. Sports cars are specialty cars. Electric cars are specialty cars. They're not a revolution. This trope that EVs are revolutionary is like saying, oh, I changed the food for a horse and buggy. That's a revolution. It's still a horse. If you change the food for a car, it's still a car. But it has other options, other features that are kind of fun, and people like that. So options in cars are what all auto dealers like and car salesmen like to have. You can have an EV option, you can have a diesel option, you can have a high horsepower option, you can have an off-road option. I mean, there's 1,000 options in cars, or thousands. So I think what's happened is citizens are voting with their pocketbook, by and large. EV sales are down in Europe 20% this year. They're down in the United States 20% this year. So the growth rate's not only slowed, it's reversed. I think it'll pick back up and start to tick back up, especially as there's fire sales on all the overbuilt EVs. It'd be a great time to buy an EV, I guess, although I would still, for me, I'd lease it because all of us are sophisticated car buyers in America. When you buy the car, you own it, which means its residual value, when you've used it for, is your issue. If you lease a car, the residual value is the other guy's problem. And it's hard to guess what the residual value of an EV is going to be in 3 or 4 years. But they'll be worth something, and those will get sold too. They'll be sold into other markets. They'll be moved overseas, and they'll be sold inexpensively, which would be great for people with lower incomes, and they'll have a way to get to work. So in a sense, all this destruction of capital by wealthy countries will benefit poorer countries unintentionally. But it really is fundamentally a destruction of capital because it's our money. It's Taxpayers are paying for this big mistake.